We haven't touched on the kind of roster changes that you guys made in the offseason, which I find super interesting because I think very few teams would have had the guts to. I mean, obviously, your Worlds run probably affected your decision making, right? But if you rewind and you say, okay, well, we beat G2 in a best of 5 with this roster, and you guys were having significant competitive success, to then take that same roster, and you could have easily said, this is our first international competition, first stage experience for these rookie players. We can kind of write it off to nerves or what have you. You could have made very valid.
You could have re-racked, basically, just run it back again.
Yeah. You could have run it back. And instead of doing that, not only do you choose to change players, but you change players to Armut, who obviously had a great playoff run overall, if you in total. And Elyoya, a true rookie jungler who, as you said earlier in this show, had never actually played on stage ever. Why would you make these changes to a team that was already competitive with the top teams in Europe? Because it's such a risk, right? It's such a risk for you guys to do this. So to come back even stronger and then win with that roster is, let's just say, like, you put your chips on the table and you won. That's very rare to do.
The majority of orgs would never do this. They would
never do it.
For sure.
And then even if they did do it, they wouldn't have made the right decisions to put them on top of it.
They wouldn't scout the right players. Yeah, of course.
But you guys did both. So tell me about it.
I mean, yeah, it turned out pretty well. As I said before, like a lot of the things that go into our scouting process are things that I've kind of mentioned a bit in passing already, right? It's like scouting for the particular niche that you need, for the particular philosophy that you need, for the type of player that you need that fits in with your team's identity, right? And Armut and Elyoya were really, really, really clear fits for that. Like in terms of being competitive last year with the top teams, we were until we weren't. And that point was basically when teams figured out what I said earlier, which is that we could only play bot side. And they just adapted around us, and they stopped us being able to snowball bot lane. Like they picked just like stalling picks on bot lane and wave cleared, and then they scaled, and then they just spat in our faces, and we couldn't do anything because we didn't know how to snowball the top side, and we didn't know how to snowball through jungle aggressively. So at that point, we were just screwed, and it happened in both playoffs, basically. So to me, that was a really clear sign that the roster was like fundamentally unbalanced, and that meant that the ceiling was low, right? And like, yes, we had some competitive success, but the whole point of doing this project, like we went to World Quarterfinals in 2019 with Splice, and then we dismantled the entire roster, right? Like we could have retained that roster. The reason that we didn't do that was because we wanted to beat G2. The reason that we didn't do that was because we wanted to be the best. We didn't want to be a top 3 team that just goes to Worlds every year, but gets stomped in every playoffs by G2 and Fnatic. So again, like when you have that as your thing, like long term, can we beat G2 with this roster? Do we have the versatility to be able to do this? The answer was no. And then it became a really...
But the risk is you get even worse than you did, right? That's why I think,
yeah.
Most orgs would have just been happy saying, all right, we're competitive, or they would have been delusional and said, yeah, we beat G2 one time. Why can't we do it again, right?
Or you just go, the guys, it was their first Worlds for some of them, and they tried hard and the scrims went well, so, we're going to try again next year, like... Cloud9 for about 4 years, whatever, and Reaper might get the draft right after 7 years. Like, we all know people love to do that angle. It's very rare people actually do like the hard choice. Because here's the thing, I'll just do what I do. Listen, this is my skill set, mate. They're asking awkward questions that no one else would ask this way. So here's the question for you, Mac, right? Because the awkward thing is, you did a great job explaining like an overview of all the things that happened from the org. You didn't mention a single fucking player's name that left the team. So magically, we didn't get to find out. So the player I want to know about is this, because no one said anything. So there must be something. Basically, as far as I can tell, purely just from like Bloodhound's nose as a journalist, right? The fact that no one ever invokes Shadow's name tells me that it can't just be about how he played the game, mate. Like, it can't just be that you thought picking Lee Sin isn't that viable. By the way, it isn't. But okay, he was fucking sick on Lee Sin. Right? It can't just be that. It was sort of implied as far as I can tell. Like, maybe that he had some sort of thing where he wasn't on the same page with the team, or maybe something happened at Worlds, or maybe he was just he was sort of off the reservation a bit. Was there some sort of issue outside of the game with him that meant you didn't take him? Because I noticed he not only didn't come back on Mad Lions, he's basically disappeared as far as we can tell. So can you tell us anything on that? I get the sense maybe the full story can't come out.
I mean, there are some things that I can't say, but what I will say is that Shadow's identity in terms of the Mad Lions like philosophy and the way they wanted to play was a good fit, right? But in terms of the pieces that we had,
he certainly looked very good.
I mean, yeah, he was great, and I love Shadow to bits. I think he's a great player. I think he's super talented. I think he's a good teammate. Like, I'm really sad that he's not on another team now. but for what we needed from the team, like he didn't offer what we needed, right? And what we needed was someone to give the early game leadership and the early game structure, because what I felt as like listening to our comms and watching us get out competed by other really strong teams in the early game was that basically we didn't have the ability to plan ahead sufficiently. And that's not something that was basically anyone's strong suit, right? Like we had a lot of players who were very good at being like decisive in the moment and like spotting the plays, but not many players that were good at planning 2 minutes ahead. And I needed someone that was good at planning 2 minutes ahead. And that's exactly what Elyoya did, right? And that's part of why the scouting process was really easy for Elyoya, because if that's the only thing I want, then I just go and get the best guy at doing that and I slot him in. And Elyoya was the best guy at doing that by far. Like we listened to his comms. Me and Kazi and Marek listened to a bunch of his VODs. Like he sent them over to us when we were interviewing him. And like an hour later, Kazi and Marek came back to me and were like, "Yeah, you should probably get this guy. He's really fucking good."
Just you know what? I thought I'd tie this in just because before, like actually in the few times we've communicated before this show and in the past through like social media and stuff, one of the things we've basically discussed is like, as you know, like I'm very interested in like sports, and so coaching is a key part of that and philosophy and stuff. So we've had some back and forth. And one of the things we were talking about is we were referencing earlier like NFL and Bill Belichick and stuff. One of the things that people don't know that makes Bill Belichick very unique is the reason why the players he trades for or even drafts are very rarely ever players that even sometimes for his team are like all fucking pro in the NFL is because as far as I can tell, he does what you were describing there. Like he tries to go out and get what he thinks he needs to like put into the puzzle basically. And so he might see something in a player that doesn't show up in the stats or they're not the best at the primary metrics, but they do exactly what he wants. Maybe it's like some guy who edge rushes in a particular way that'll complement the rest of the team, right? But actually, if people don't know, a lot of other teams in traditional sports, especially in the ones where you can draft, they actually go the other way. And what you do is, in the off-season, you just try and sign the best player, and then you try and cram him into your team somewhere, and you hope that works. So I know a lot of teams, I think a lot of the LEC teams do that, quite frankly, mate. They just look in the off-season, especially with these rookies, and they go, who was popping off? So if they look and they're results-oriented, they go, Tinks has to be the best jungler. 91 for that. I'm just fucking memeing on that one, boys. Or they go, you know, like forget whatever the player might be, someone who's smurfing, right? Would you agree? Is there a contrast in philosophy in how you do it at Mad Lions there?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are way too many conversations that really disappoint me when I hear other coaches talking about this guy is the best top laner, or this guy is the best jungler, or this guy is a good jungler. Like, yes, he's good, but that's not interesting. Like when it comes to actually building a roster and evaluating a player, like saying he's good is not interesting. Understanding what his specialism is and how that fits into what you already have or what you need is interesting, right? And like if you like what you're talking about Bill Belichick and his recruitment, right? He's recruiting specialists a lot of the time. And if you look at the way that, for example, Fnatic in previous years when they were insane was constructed was that they basically had 5 specialists on their roster, right? And they had like, for example, Hillestad had like 3 champions that he was just god tier on. And every game Hillestad would get Pyke or Rakan, and people would be like, "Why did you give Hillestad Pyke or Rakan?" It's like, well, because you had to brand Brox's Lee Sin, and you had
the draft balance that was nuts, right? Wasn't it? Yeah, exactly. And there's always something open.
And you had to ban Nemesis's Corki, and you had to ban Reckless's Tristana, right? Like all of this stuff, like they complemented each other in the perfect way that meant that like you couldn't not give them their best champions because they were also specialized and so good at doing their individual niche, right? And that's why it's much more interesting to have those players than a player who's a 91 on your top trumps card.
Yeah, it's also that in Belichick's case too, it's not even that it's his starters, it's that he designs the roles of the team, and then that's why the next man up philosophy always worked, because the Patriots were always less affected by injuries than other teams because they just had like 3 guys deep who all were told to do one thing. Like they had that one specialty. And so if one of them got injured, it wasn't like this guy had to be some sort of god player to come into that position, because the definition of that role was so clear within the hierarchy.
I mean, you know the quote, Monty, the quote Bill Belichick has, because another thing I love about him, by the way, is he's just an arsehole. So that I can relate. You know, if you're right, you can be. Listen, if this show had a fucking tagline, it would be, if you're right, you don't have to be a nice guy. That would be the fucking tagline, wouldn't it? So basically, one of the things I love about Bill Belichick is his line. It really is the line. He says to the players, just do your job. You have to understand every other coach goes with what I said before, the media angle. Like, listen, I want you to be the best player you can be, into develop. This guy just goes, listen, motherfucker, do X, only do X. And if I ever see you do Y, you're out. They're like, but I was a top player in college. He's like, this isn't college. Like, I love that guy, mate. It's like, it's what by the way, it's what every coach wishes they could do. But here's another factor, like the G2 example. No one else is allowed to do that. He is his own GM and he's the coach and he's won everything. So he gets ultimate green light for everything. So as a result, guess what? If other coaches tried doing his style, if you do that bad for 2 seasons, you're going to be fucking fired, mate. You are not, and no one else is going to pick you up. So like, you also, I guess, you have to get a certain status before you can get away with the shit he's doing.
Well, the other thing that he does that's so interesting is that he's very famous for like other NFL teams. Like they play music during practice. Like, you know, they're trying to make the players have a good time. Belichick has banned like all music being played during practice and
just
like
Gregorian chant only.
Yeah. He's just grinding it out there.
Of silence and suffering.
Exactly. But the reason why he gets away with that is because all the players want to play for the Patriots because they know that they can get championships. So he doesn't have to make it fun for them. He doesn't have to, you know, make any kind, he doesn't have to capitulate in any capacity whatsoever. And so he can just focus directly on the most efficient forms of practice, getting right to the core of the issue. But a lot of players have said it wasn't fun being on the Patriots.